Now, if you were to compare the Chicago you grew up in versus the Chicago now, do you feel now it's more dangerous? If there is a difference now compared to when you grew up, what are the biggest the differences?
Um, I think it's more dangerous now because there's no structure. But I grew up with it being no structure. I grew up watching it decay. I watched it decay. So I watched it. I watched it. I watched it.
Kind of transition from the
Kind of
structure.
transition to structure, but I want to say I watched it. I watched the decay of it because you watch something start to crumble away. You know, when you see bits and pieces of it taken away, you watch it crumble. You watch it fall. You know, so it's like demolished. I watched the demolishment of it.
Got you.
You know, because it wasn't just done on its own. So I watched demolishment of it, and I watched what it do to the streets of Chicago. So I watched. I guess I watched. I seen the difference between me growing up and and how the kids were going to grow up after me. You know, even with me, because I grew up in it, which means there was no structure. You know, you had the different leadership that was out in the streets demolished to the point where it's scattered. You know, it's people trying to regroup, figure out who to trust, who's smart, who's not, who to follow, who not to follow. And, and then it goes to who got money, who don't have money, who's taking care of people, who's not taking care of people. So now you have structure all imbalanced and scattered all up. And so what comes along with that is chaos. And now it's chaos that can't be controlled because there's no structure to control it. You know, there's no one you can go to that can go and step in. It's like so many people are going against each other.
Got you.
Yeah, it turned into like a lawless city.
Do you have a idea what year you start to see like the transition really happening from where you was growing up in to the era now? Like what year you see it start to kind of turn over to what it is today?
Coming out of the 90s, I would say the 90s into the 2000s, that era. The 90s, I would say the 90s and a little bit before then, I watched it start. I would say going into the 90s and coming out of the 90s is when I started seeing things just start break up.
Got you.
Like that. You know, and then it's realizing, because you don't realize it right away. You don't think it's strategically done. You just see stuff happening like, wow, 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 wow. And then you start seeing the impact later on. And then you realize that this stuff was strategically done to do what it's doing now, what I'm witnessing now. And then that's when you feel like you've just been manipulated.
Mm.
And that's when you get a whole nother energy.
Got you.
Yeah.